Hi everyone! So I just wanted to start this episode by quickly letting you all know that we are going to be taking a brief hiatus from Jane Eyre to go through these lovely works by Poe. It's going to be a fun little, set us into fall moment. And yeah, I just thought it would be something fun, something to change it up. But we will be getting back into Jane Eyre after these couple of episodes. And I hope you all enjoy them. Now, without further ado, let's get in the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Barely Bookish podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Edgar Allan Poe. And I am joined by the lovely. I am joined by the lovely. I psyched myself out. You're right. I
do it all the time.
I'm joined by the lovely Leanna Renee Hieber. Yeah. She is an author of both nonfiction, fiction. You might have read The Strangely Beautiful, The Spectral City, or her nonfiction book that has come out recently. She is the author of The Haunted History of Invisible Women, which was up and nominated for a Bram Stoker Award. So welcome to the podcast.
Yay! Thank you. Yes, thank you. It's been a wild ride, and I'm really glad to be here talking about my literary love of my life, who I describe as my literary boyfriend on every tour that I give in New York City, where we pass by places where he lived and worked and wrote. And so, yeah, he's my main squeeze.
I honestly did not know he was from New York.
I mean,
Like, he lived in New York.
lived in New York. Like, he was from many states claim him as their own. Anywhere he lived, there is like a Poe house, and sort of a Poe claim to fame. So he honestly was all over the East Coast.
Okay.
But he spent many formative years and very important years writing stuff in New York. He wrote The Raven while he was a New Yorker.
Ooh. So, is that? Oh wait. If I mess up these poems, I'm going to be really embarrassed about it. Is that the one Under the Floorboards? No, it's not.
No,
It's
that's
totally
that
not.
one's so The Raven is his epic poem with Nevermore as the refrain, but Under the Floorboards is the Telltale Heart, which is one of his most famous short stories.
Yeah, I am like trying to pull this out of my high school brain right now. I haven't read them in a minute.
Understood. Well, he factors into so many things that we do. So I work in addition to being a writer, I'm also a New York City tour guide, and I work with a company called Burrows of the Dead, and we do tours, macabre-based tours in New York. So a lot of ghost tours, but we also give an Edgar Allan Poe tour, going around Greenwich Village, talking about the places where he lived. So, and my co-author, Andrea Janes, is the founder of Burrows of the Dead. So she's my co-author for A Haunted History of Invisible Women. So when we were putting our heads together about creating this book about women ghosts, and their meaning and their backgrounds and what stereotypes they fit into and all of the things that we were doing structuring this and how ghosts affect our consciousness in this country, we had to sort of rely on some things that were said by Poe. And so we come back to Poe a great deal in our book. And, obviously we're huge fans of his work, and we really are interested in myth busting about him, because a lot of people have a really poor understanding of who he was as a person and think a lot of lies that were told about him after his death are truths. And so we're very much about restoring Poe's good name, because he was not unhinged as some reports said of him during his time, because the guy who wrote the biography right after his death, happened to be his literary rival. So Rufus Griswold is
Oh.
not a good guy. He wrote the first biography of Poe, and he put in things like he was a morphine addict and all these other things, that he was actually unhinged and completely out of his mind, and darker and more twisted than he actually was.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, he was a melancholy man. He suffered from melancholia. That was sort of the Victorian word for depression.
Mm-hmm.
He battled alcoholism. Yes. That's something that a lot of writers historically and presently deal with and battle with.
Mm-hmm.
He was struggling to get paid for his work, which is something that all of, whether it's the striking unions for the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild, or it's the average person waiting for their publishing check. I work in traditional publishing, and often those publishing payments are late, and he was
Mm-hmm.
dealing with that during all of his life. So one of the things that I love doing and talking about Poe is, he's such a backbone of my own work, but I also am
Mm-hmm.
interested in sort of restorative history, where we can kind of set the record straight about people who had a lot of misconceptions in their life. And we certainly do that within Haunted History of Invisible Women. There's a lot of women in there that had a lot of misconceptions about them in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was the quote unquote Salem witches who were not in fact witches,
Mm-hmm.
or Sarah Winchester being labeled a madwoman when she was anything but, and Poe being a madman, which he absolutely was not. Just because he wrote dark
Mm-hmm.
fiction doesn't mean that he was living in that world. He wrote literary criticism as often as he ever wrote horror. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I'm excited to dive into some of these stories with you because they're so formative, and we can talk about that as we go. But he really is the bedrock of so much of genre fiction, especially for the American literary canon.
Yeah. I think I mostly just thought he did like poetry just cuz that's what he's most known for. So when you sent this to me, I was like, "What?" Like I kind of forgot that Telltale Heart was a short story and not a poem because I've just tied his name to Poe poem, you
Sure,
know?
it's right in there.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's like if you name your kid like Dr. McDoctor. If he doesn't become a doctor, what else are you going to do with a
I
name like
I don't
that?
know what you do with a name like that. You have to go into something, get a PhD in something.
Hmm. Yeah. You have to like at least have your PhD, even if you're not a medical doctor.
Well, because you're going to be called doctor, so yeah,
Hmm.
might as well earn it. Might as well have the credentials somehow.
Is it doctor, doctor, doctor at that point? Maybe.
It might be. These are the rhetorical and existential questions here on this podcast.
The yeah, the pressing questions we
Yeah,
need
we're
answers
here to
to.
answer these things for you.
So we are going to be discussing two of the Dupin.
I think it's Dupin. I'm
Dupin,
not fluent in
sorry.
French. I took some in school, but so I think it would be sort of French pronounced Dupin, Dupin.
Yeah.
So American audiences would look at that and say Dupin, but Dupin is yeah, Auguste Dupin.
We're gonna do our best on
We're gonna
this
do our best
podcast.
with, yeah,
Everybody knows that I was allowed to cheat my way through French. So
fair.
yeah, by the teacher. The teacher just gave me the textbook every time there was a test. So
Wow.
yeah,
Well, so you know a little French by
yeah.
having the textbook in front of you. So, it'll
Hmm.
work.
Hmm. If the answers are there, I can read them.
Well, thankfully, these stories are not all in French, but they do have some French in them.
Yeah. So French listeners, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Um, I might just go with our friendly friend D. I might shorten it. It depends on how badly I keep messing up.
well, interestingly enough, in the Purloined Letter, which is the third of the Auguste Dupin narratives, there is a D slash, as you would see often in Victorian
Mhm.
stuff. You'll see where just the character's last initial will be
Mhm.
used, and so there's precedent. So you can just
Yeah.
call him D if nothing else. We will know that it is in fact C. Auguste Dupin in
That's
the
the note.
titular role.
Yeah. Poe labeled it right there for all of us non-French people. So we're going to be discussing two of the stories. We're going to discuss the murders in Rue Morgue.
Hmm.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, no,
And
morgue is correct. It's where we get the word.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just like, why are they living in a morgue? Okay, have you seen this whole trend of people buying old morgues? Old morgues? Old funeral homes and just living in them?
You know, it's, I mean, if that's your life choice,
Yeah.
I wish you the best. I just hope you don't mind maybe being haunted.
Yeah.
I
Like
don't,
you either have
yeah.
to be a skeptic or
Yeah.
like really comfortable with ghosts.
Yeah.
Those are your only two options.
Yeah, totally. Or if you have any sense of like the various funerary industries. I mean, the concept
Mhm.
of a funeral parlor. So this is a tangent. Do
That's
I have
fine.
time for a tangent?
Oh yeah, you're good.
So this is a tangent.
Mhm.
So the term funeral parlor did not come into
Mhm.
common parlance in our language until the 1920s, because prior to that, funerals generally would be held in the house, and if you didn't have space in your parlor, then they would be held in in a space of worship, in whatever various faith you might have, or lack thereof. It would have been some sort of public space if you didn't have the space in your house. But generally speaking, even in very humble dwellings, you would be having the wake at your house, and a lot of the embalming and the dressing of the bodies and all of that would be done by the women of the family. And
Mm.
so women have kind of been womb to tomb sort of involved with the life cycle, as it were. And so when we were approached by an editor to write a haunted history of invisible women, we were thinking about how do we talk about women and ghosts. And well, it's part of,
Mhm.
in some ways, the part of the life cycle that women have sort of been tasked with in many different aspects of caring for not only life, but in passing as well. So I think the
Mhm.
concept of the funeral parlor it's a very relatively, it's in terms of human history, it's a very new and modern concept. And so in some ways, for people, it if you're not completely terrified by the concept of death, then a funeral home is just a structure. So it really
Mhm.
depends on your kind of views about things, because it's just there tend to be historic houses that were converted by
Mhm.
having larger spaces into something else, but started out, probably in a lot of the historic buildings that I've seen, started out as a house, and that there was this possible practice associated with it. But still, again, that's only about 100 years old. Even so, I had, in my Spectral City series, I had to create a term, viewing parlor, to have an exception to that, because it was set in 1899, and that series is set
Mhm.
at this point before funeral parlor was an actual word. So I had to sort of explain what the viewing parlor was in the terms of how it was necessary for this particular group of people, that they felt that they didn't want to host it in their house, that they wanted something external, because that,
Mhm.
and note that that was not common practice at this point. So the the way our world is kind of coming back around to a broader discussion of death, and also the death positive movement with the Order of the Good Death. Caitlin Doherty, as a great author of books dealing with these topics of grief, death, mourning, loss. How do we deal with ecologically with bodies, things like that, and like all of these things are
Mhm.
part of a modern discussion now, that are actually kind of going back to more traditional practices and kind of
Mhm.
reclaiming what is possible, as long as people feel that they're comfortable talking about it. So, but yes, the word morgue is a French word.
Wow. Most words are like
Well, they got something in there. So the Latin,
paparazzi.
yeah, the Latin languages, the all those roots go into all kinds of
Mhm.
things. So our the English language is such
Mm.
a amalgam of so many things.
Yeah. Also, this is going to be the moment that I'm shouting out Lauren the Mortician on TikTok.
Heck yeah,
No real reason except for the fact that I'm obsessed with her channel.
there you go.
Um, yeah, anybody that hasn't seen it, she just stitches people that make like really bad decisions. Like, and then she's like, and this is how you could die.
Yeah.
and like lists them all out. And like she especially does it for like kids, like people
Mm-hmm.
that put their kids in dangerous situations.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No
and like
PSA.
explains it in a nice way. Yeah. But I'm obsessed with that channel. So highly recommend.
Totally.
Yeah. There's also like a lot of skits about her being a mortician, which are also very good.
It is a very, very, very interesting job. I've had a couple of friends uh, in the field, and it is, yeah, all kinds of things.
At
But there's
least you know
not
your office is
actually,
always cold.
oh, yeah, totally. But in the murders in the Rue Morgue, there's not actually
Mm-hmm.
a morgue in this story, other than the fact that there are two bodies that are
Mm-hmm.
in a house. Rue, RUE, is the French term for street. So this is
Oh.
basically Morgue Street. The murders of Morgue Street is essentially what this really
Okay.
means. So
And the other story we're going to be going into is the mystery of Marie Roget.
yes, one of
Yeah,
America's first true crime stories.
I'm very excited to talk about that. Um, as I am very specific with my true crime. This is a little note I'm going to put out there. I The only true crime I like is the people that do true crime with the assistance of the families involved.
Yes,
Because there's nothing I hate more than people capitalizing off of murder. You know what I mean?
correct,
Especially when they're like not giving care to the family,
correct.
you know?
Correct.
Like,
Well, yeah, it's like the Jeffrey Dahmer series was released on Netflix against the wishes
mm-hmm,
of all of the victims' families.
mm-hmm,
That I didn't watch it and I won't watch it, and I don't
mm-hmm.
feel bad about saying so because I'm sorry, you need to center these. This is not a historical crime where no one is still out there grieving,
Yeah, yeah,
and so I felt like that was very insensitive and irresponsible. So I'm
mm-hmm.
with you on that.
Yeah. Netflix did do a Netflix original um, that I am okay with, and I have to think of it's Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah,
And they had a lot of like their family involved.
yeah.
That's the kind of I like that. Or everybody has to be that was involved past and plus 10 years
Right, right.
at
It
least.
has to be there. There has to be a too soon
Yeah.
respectful thing. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we've had people ask us if we will lead ghost tours down towards the Twin Tower area, and we vehemently say that is
Mm-mm.
disrespectful. That is a too
Mm-mm.
soon thing. You cannot ask a New Yorker about that. Do not, like,
Yeah.
that is disrespectful, and people are still grieving, and that's definitely a too soon scenario. And we
Yeah.
can talk about the grief and loss and the pain of that day. We can talk
Mm-hmm.
about that. There's ways to
Yeah.
talk about the event without making it sensationalized in a way that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk a lot about that in our book, because within A Haunted History of Invisible Women, we have to talk about how the ghost tour industry, if the ghost tours are not curated and led well with respect for the
Mm-hmm.
dead at the first and foremost, then you're actually sort of creating a ghostly tourism that's actually, I think, harmful. So
Yeah.
definitely use your judgment when you're going to a haunted location to try to find a company that looks like they're going to be respectful, and
Mm-hmm.
not just there to give you a jump scare, because then they'll probably also have really shitty history. They'll probably not
Yeah.
tell you the actual facts about or dates of a given location, or they'll pass
Mm-hmm.
along hearsay about X, Y, or Z things that were said about people that lived there in their own lifetime that was harmful then, let alone now. So,
Mm-hmm.
so definitely, try to do a little bit of your due diligence, I think, in the same way. So these
Yeah.
industries are, I think it's important for unsolved mysteries to have the light and the interest in them to get them solved.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that sometimes crime does need a certain amount of people involved in wanting and invested in wanting to solve it. So I think that that's an aspect of true crime that can be helpful. And that's
Mm-hmm.
certainly the case in some of the Long Island killer stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been something that people I know within the true crime community have been coming together to try to put some pieces together for those families too. And that's, those things are still going to be unfolding, like day by day. I'm still seeing information come out and things like that. So it's just, as long as people are being respectful, I think it's fine to be asking questions, but you just can't take someone else's story insensitively. And in the case of Marie Roget, we'll talk about what that meant for in 1841 when that came out.
Yeah.
Or when the murder it was based on occurred. So yes, so because it itself came out in 1845. So
okay, I was gonna say, how much of a time period
the
difference
time
was
period
there?
differences. So it was so the timeline of, so going back to Poe, so the three tales, there are three stories that star C. Auguste Dupin. He's considered to be our first detective story. The guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, said during his own lifetime that Edgar Allan Poe invented the detective novel. So if Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who created Sherlock Holmes, says that Poe invented it, I think it's a safe bet to say, yeah, and you'll definitely see and notice a lot of the quirks of Dupin definitely fold into a lot of the quirks of a lot of the gifted detectives that we see in all of famous detective fiction. So Dupin really set the template for all of these things. So there's three stories he appears in. He first appeared in Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was 1841. Was when that was first published. And then the following year, Mystery of Marie Roget came out in 1842, based on the 1841 death of Mary Cecilia Rogers. So he Frenchified her name to be Marie Roget because he's giving that to Dupin, who's a French character, and those are set in Paris. But there's parallels to that. And then the final appearance of Auguste Dupin is in the Purloined Letter, which came out in 1844. And Poe himself died in 1849. So there was a revised version of The Mystery of Marie Roget, which came out in 1845. And we'll talk about that revision, because I think that's an important aspect, because new details came to light in that, and Poe then reflected them in his new edition that came out a year after the original edition.
I don't know which one I read. Hold on, because this will be funny. I read 1850 is what mine says.
Well, then you would have probably had his later version, which had one of the theories of her death in it, and we'll I don't want to spoil that just yet.
Okay, we'll get to it, and you'll tell me which one I read.
And yeah, and if you don't mention it, then I'll know that it's not in there, and then we'll be like, well, there's this other theory, and then we'll talk about that.
Okay, so let's start with the murders in the Rue Morgue. So first, my understanding of this is that it must have been coming out in a magazine, because it's in a lot of parts.
Yes.
So you can see that there's like a little bit of recap at the beginning.
Yep.
So it's like, if you just got this newspaper for the first time, but by the last one, he's like, you better have gotten the other ones.
He's introducing the character with Rue Morgue. This is the first time that he's introduced this character, and there was sort of a 19th century convention of kind of like reintroducing you to somebody that you should have already known, but you've actually never met them before. So that's also sometimes a bit of the context of the Victorian style. And Poe liked to kind of drop you in the middle of stuff too. Part of it, and part of it's because he was writing in short installments, and so he wasn't writing novels. He's writing these short stories, and some of those things kind of begin in media res, in the moment, in the beginning of things, when they're in the middle. So you're listening to this narrator character introduce the main character for a little while.
Yeah, I kind of love that. I prefer just to like get thrown into the action. I feel like it's a lot better. I feel like it's a lot more interesting.
Yep.
So I was very much a fan of these short stories. But let's start with part one. So we find out it's set in Paris. It's 1840, and this is where we first meet Auguste Dupin. I'm gonna get it.
It's in there. I
Yeah.
somewhere in that range of Dupin, somewhere in there.
It's fine. We know what we're talking
We
about.
do. We
The
know who we're talking
listeners
about.
know. So, we find out that Dupin does not trouble himself with anything materialistic, just books. And honestly, what a mood. That is me. You can't see it because I'm in the wrong room, but I do have a very extensive book collection. So, a man after my own heart, honestly. So, our narrator, which I don't know if it's supposed to be Poe or if it's just like an ethereal narrator.
Yeah. I honestly think it's like the universal narrator guy.
Yeah.
Like he is, there's an interesting duality that is expressed in a lot of Poe, where I almost
Mhm.
think it's like aspects of himself, but also aspects of things that he's interested in. And so I think in
Mhm.
some ways too, he's able, because he did come from a theater background. Um, his parents were actors. His mother
Mhm.
died when he was 2, so he didn't get a chance to really live with
Oh.
them. But he was very familiar with theater, and he wrote a lot of theater criticism, and was very, was very aware of what was happening in the world of theater. And definitely, I think, has a certain amount of ability to get into a role. And so
Mhm.
I feel like that there's sort of the role of narrator that I feel that Poe slips into very easily, but it doesn't
Okay.
always mean that it's directly him. He's still this
Okay.
other character.
Mhm. I did get nervous that this was actually not a story, like a not a fictional story for a second, because and then I was like, wait, because they okay. So for context, I had recently read The Lottery by Shirley
Hmm.
Jackson, and at the time, people didn't know if it was fiction or not. So I was trying to think like where how this was like presented. Like, did people know this was fiction, or did they think this might be real? Like that's what I wonder sometimes.
Poe
No.
Poe really leaned into that as an unanswered question.
Hmm.
He participated in something called like the Great Moon Hoax, that he
Oh.
wrote. And so there's this whole thing that he wrote about this. Was it the moon hoax or the balloon hoax? I'm blanking on this. It was. Let me see if it was the balloon hoax, because there was a moon hoax in a paper about going to the moon and
Hmm.
landing on the moon. And
Okay.
we as humanity, everybody did land on the moon, but that was in the 1960s. But in the 19th
Hmm.
century, they did not land on the moon. So please do
Hmm.
not conflate, people who are not into history. Please do not conflate this. Me saying no, we in the 20th century had a moon landing, but they did not have it in the 19th century. Just saying.
Yeah.
But there was a moon hoax, and then there was this balloon hoax. And let's see which one
Okay.
was which one was Poe's. Um,
I,
and
just a
the balloon it's a
clarification
balloon
for
hoax.
those.
The balloon hoax. Okay.
Okay.
So I thought, all right. So the great moon hoax happened in one of the New York newspapers, and people thought it was a
Hmm.
real thing. And so Poe created a balloon hoax and called it like
Hmm.
the balloon hoax, but then was published like it was a real account. So he was doing all kinds of these things where he was toying with reality. In fact, his story, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, was republished in a British mesmerism magazine as true fact of
Hmm.
an actual mesmerist's ability to keep a spirit outside of a dead body and still be animating the dead body with the spirit as a separate thing, and sort of keeping the spirit in limbo until it returned to itself and then dissembled in a disgusting pile when it was actually released and able to finally putrefy in the very end of this,
Hmm.
and which is totally disgusting and beautifully written as only Poe can do, right? But
Hmm.
yeah, no, a British mesmerism magazine was like, here's this account of mesmerism in New York, and Poe was like, no, 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 okay, whatever. He's just was like, all right, whatever, pay me, because that was poor
Hmm.
Poe constantly hunting down paychecks, which is very relatable.
I feel that emotionally right now.
I do too. I do too. I'm an artist. There's always
Hmm.
there's always a, hey, somebody send me I invoiced you. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
please,
work, I work,
please.
I freelance across several different areas of public speaking and writing and sometimes performance. So it's just, yeah, and tour guiding and all of that. I will say, thankfully, Andrea Jane's my co-author and my boss. She always pays on
Mhm.
time. So she's the best one
Ugh,
of the lot. Bless her.
the best. I thought about this while you're talking about the believability. Um, I don't know if you've ever listened to Spirits podcast.
Oh
If
yeah, it's great.
not, yeah, I'm obsessed. But they did a whole episode about creepypasta and how like people just all know it's fake,
Yeah.
except some people like don't pay attention. And like I've been seeing a lot of that. Um, People are picking up old creepypastas or doing new ones, and they're putting them on um, like the Reddit to TikTok pipeline
Yep.
of doing these like voiceover
Yep.
over whatever videos, and they're like creepy pastas, and like people in the comments don't know, and I'm like, I thought this was just something like universally, you can pick the air, and you're like, that has a taste of a nice creepy pasta, and people just don't know.
I I feel like we are going to be a very difficult era for archaeologists to figure
Yeah,
out, especially
yeah,
with AI, trying to like picking up bad information and feeding that into the algorithm. It's like
mm-hmm.
I don't. It's I have no idea. I feel very very badly for future scholars. And I hope
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of the falsehoods will just cease to exist in, and that archived versions of the actual truth will be the ones to prevail. But I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna all go. I don't know. But
Yeah.
Poe enjoyed this liminal space between reality
Mm-hmm.
and fiction, and that ended up sort of not being to his credit when people sort of equated his stories with him being a madman, which he was absolutely not. So that's in some ways, it's the that line and where and how that line blurred then, wasn't necessarily helpful to him in his life, and it's not necessarily helpful to us now. But we're still navigating these things in a certain amount of comfort. Like this is we're still dealing with problems that were still problems in the very first early days of journalism, so, and the first early
Mm-hmm.
days of newspapers. It's just that the internet makes everything so much faster. That's the only difference.
Yeah. I think too is like you can even think about how people treat Poe, like how people treat people who read dark romance books
Oh
too.
yeah. Oh
Now
yeah.
they'll be like, "Oh, so like you like kidnapping?" And it's like, "No,
No, no,
chill,
no.
chill."
Yeah, the inability to separate things out is, we're living through a reality bending, uh, time where it's hard to sift through. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So you were curious if Murders in the Rue Morgue was taking off of a true crime.
I could. I thought this was a like a not a fantasy, but like a fiction story.
Yeah.
However, when we went to the Marie Roget, I was like, I'm now less certain that
Right,
this is
because
fiction.
yes, because that one is not
Yeah.
fiction, but Rue Morgue is fiction, although
Mm-hmm.
possibly plausible considering. I won't spoil it until you do when you do your rundown.
Yeah.
So
It
we'll
made
get to
me
the culprit.
second guess it
Yeah,
because of
totally.
reading the other one.
Totally. Because it is presented as plausible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we'll get into it. But so narrator meets Auguste Dupin at a bookstore, which is honestly how all great rom-coms start. Just throwing that out there as a little tasty tidbit for everyone. Little thought experiment. I don't know. I'm just, hoping, dreaming. Anyways, um so they were both trying to find the same book. Again, great rom-com start.
Yeah.
Totally unrelated. I'm totally not thinking about that as a rom-com. It's fine. So our narrator starts like listening to this guy after they run into each other multiple times, always at different bookstores. Which I just like the idea that like basically they were doing a bar crawl but a bookstore crawl, and they just keep going to the same ones. They're like, all right, we're 5 books in. Tell me a little about yourself, you know?
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah. I want to imagine it was all the same day. I definitely don't think it was. No, they say later we met again. So there wasn't like a few days later. It just said later. They could just be going bookstore hopping.
I think that's probably it. I mean, this is an epic romance, bromance. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I yes, the narrator describes himself as a dude. So yeah, that's
They are living together,
they're
kind
living
of.
together. I
So,
mean, I think anything's on the table. Everybody, anything's
yeah.
on the table.
Just, throwing it out there as a fun little thought that maybe they're dating. I don't know.
Totally could be.
This is my little headcanon. It
I
doesn't have to be for everyone.
Hey, I support however it is read. I feel like it's a certain amount of open ended.
I just like the idea of like a couple's investigation unit.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I think
I
it's
mean,
adorable.
but think about it too. It's like these two people, and then you think about Holmes and Watson. It's like this template. Basically, Conan Doyle was like, "That's a great structure. I'm just going to use it over here."
I know. I While I was reading this, I was like, I have to figure out which comes first because
No, this came
very
first.
yeah.
This came for this. This is he invented the structure.
Hmm. And then he was like, you know what, Sherlock? What if we just scratch out this name right here?
He won't be French, he'll be English, and then but
Yeah.
he'll be just as quirky and
Yeah.
have
And
just
then
as much
House was
fanfic.
like, oh.
Right, right.
So Dupin gives a bunch of family history. Our narrator is very interested, but he's like, moving on, moving on. I don't really care about the family history. I just like books. um, and our narrator's like, you know what? This is a straight quote. A friendship of such a man would be for me riches. They're in love. Just kidding. I need to stop saying that. But I just like love in the space.
There is a clear fondness there. It is
Hmm.
it is not for me to judge the nature of their relationship, but there is clear care there.
Yeah. They're definitely great friends. Fan fiction authors have definitely done the work for me though.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, so he agrees to go and live with Poe. How many bookstores did you have to go to where he's like, what if you just like came and lived with me? What if we just like hung out forever?
He goes to live with Dupin. He doesn't go to live with Poe. You said Poe. That's hilarious.
Oh, sorry.
In the I want to in the let's lest we add the creepy pasta to Poe's actual history. No, the narrator of his own story does not in fact become sentient and live with the author. He goes to live with the fictional detective
Yeah.
Auguste Dupin. What I kind of love that though.
Unknown narrator.
Unknown narrator goes to live with who is in fact never named.
Hmm.
Um, Goes to live with Dupin.
I I did Rebecca not that long ago. Like it was a while ago. It was months ago. But like I assumed the narrator's name was Rebecca. So having to go back out and cross out all of my notes to say unnamed narrator,
And yeah,
narrator said,
oh my god, yeah, you got slit yourself.
I'm reliving this for
Yeah,
you
no,
right
that's
now.
the origin of that whole deal.
Hmm. So narrator, I'm just gonna go that way. Um, so we find out Dupont was a lover of the night, same, and likes to walk the streets of Paris because one, that's the best time to walk the streets of Paris because there's not that many people out. Otherwise, if you've ever been to Paris, it's insane. There's people everywhere, all the
Hmm.
time, forever.
Hmm. It's
At
true,
night, there's just like slightly less.
but they're still out, which is beautiful.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful
yeah.
city. I love it so much.
I like it. I think I would like it better at night.
Oh
During the
yeah,
day, it was just a bit overwhelming for me.
It's amazing. My favorite tidbit of the narrator talking about how they close all the curtains so that no light comes in, and like as
Mm-hmm.
a vampiric creature, I'm a total night owl, so I really
Mm-hmm.
respect this. Close all the
Mm-hmm.
drapes, don't let the light
Yeah.
in. They like
Yeah.
lit candles too, which is funny because like Dupin kind of has, like, he didn't really inherit the family fortune in the way that like he hoped, and so he's not really got a lot of money. So it's very funny to me that they like do not use natural light and instead light candles, which
Mm-hmm.
is that's just, I'm like, you guys are so goth.
I love it.
It's
Listen,
hilarious.
everybody knows you don't use the big light.
It's too painful.
You just gotta have your cute little accent lights everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we have lamps.
It's true.
So then the narrator says that Dupont surprised him by telling him what he knew of his own soul. And then he found the things he knew are the things that I about me that I thought only I could possibly know. So it's really setting up Dupont to almost have like this other earthly like knowledge, which I'm obsessed with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah,
Also, yeah.
this is setting up the reader knowing like, yes, this is a man who is going to be examining
Mm-hmm,
everything and
mm-hmm,
is always on intake, which I think is really important to have that set up as this detective character that does seem like his deductions are preternatural, which is definitely something that also is used, that Sherlock uses all the time.
this is my favorite type of character, like the very quiet, very stoic, like sitting in the corner, and then like you think they're not paying attention, they're like playing on their phone, and then they say you say something, and they're like, "Actually, I noticed that 3 hours ago you did this, and this," which then led me to understand, and you're like, "You were paying attention this whole time."
It,
That's the kind of character I'm obsessed
it's the
with.
template for every quirky detective series
Mm-hmm.
and every show across
Mm-hmm.
every different country. Like I was on this one Netflix binge where I just was like watching every crime drama from like, Sweden to Finland to Poland to like, I was like, what is your version of the brooding cop,
Mm-hmm.
Irish, what is your version of the brooding cop drama? And they all had
Mm-hmm.
one, and it was all, but it all kind of goes back to this character. I feel like it's all traces back to this.
Yeah. And I will never stop getting enough of it. Like,
Mm-mm,
I'll
I
never
love it.
stop. It's always good. Ugh. It's like watching a doctor show. I I'll never stop. I love them. I recently have gone on a vampire binge. We did Interview with the Vampire. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Have you seen the new TV show?
Oh yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I'm a
Just saw
fan.
the.
I'm a fan of the books. I'm a fan of the original
Mhm.
movie. I'm a fan. Yeah, no, I love what they're doing.
Yeah.
I like the changes that they're making, and
Hmm.
also what they're staying true to. It's all it's all up for grabs, and I think it's all being
Yeah.
very well done.
I'm obsessed. I recently started watching What We Do in the Shadows. So
The
good.
best.
I just started it and I'm like, why did I not have this earlier?
The subtitle being "Interview with Some Vampires" is the actual subtitle of that film, and that film is one of my actual favorite films.
Mhm.
And
I
the
haven't
the
seen the
show is
movie
great,
yet.
but the original film
Hmm.
is my favorite because it is just, it's all, I also feel very called out as a goth. It like very much calls out goths in general in the way that like
Hmm.
we can't take ourselves too seriously. We need to every now and then something's got to poke fun at us.
I have to watch it cost me money to rent it. It wasn't on any of the thousands of streaming
Hmm.
services I feel like I have at this point. So I'm gonna like watch it at the end.
I
But
own
I've been
it. I
watching the
own
TV
the
show.
DVD
Yeah.
of that movie. I love it.
Yeah. I am excited. I just saw Queen of the Damned recently. Very good movie. Obsessed. Very 2005 Hot Topic, and I love that.
Yes, that was an important era of Hot Topic. It's true.
The best era, arguably, of Hot Topic, honestly.
Yeah, that was a good run.
Hmm. Bring back the studded belt. Bring back the studded belt.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of mad mine is gone. It didn't survive one of my moves. It's very sad.
Yeah. Mine, I kept having to punch new holes because I got it when I was in middle school. Um, so I eventually ran out of space. And I was like, okay, goodbye, my sweet, sweet child. But going back to our not so vampiric, but creature of the night, anyways, Dupin. We get this moment where they're walking down the road, our narrator and Dupin, and he's just barely even like says something, and Dupin just responds, and he's like, "Oh, you're right. He is a little fellow. That's true. He would have been more successful if he acted in a lighter, less serious place." Oh, he didn't even say something. Actually, sorry. Yeah, the narrator doesn't say anything, and Dupin just responds, and he goes, "Yeah, there can be no doubt." That's what the narrator says. And he goes, they're walking for a couple more steps. And he's like, "Wait a minute. I didn't say anything out loud. I was thinking about that." And he's like, how? How? How'd you do that? Care to elaborate? And then Dupin's like, "Oh, well, I knew you were thinking about it because, um, you looked at that building basically and made a little face. So we're walking a couple more steps, and you made another face. You looked at this thing, and then you looked at that thing. And then I knew logically that you must be thinking about that play we saw 2 days ago. So."
And he is, in fact. So this is
Yeah.
one of many examples of the course of these stories where
Mm-hmm.
the narrator walks us through some of that. He doesn't always
Mm-hmm.
walk us through that, but he's setting that up as an example of, and
Yeah.
thankfully he doesn't walk us through every last moment of every single synapse.
Mm-hmm.
And you know but I think it's important in when you're setting up a character and dynamic that how he gets to where he's going is explained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's like a lot of tidbits going from how they went from the fruit cellar to then the cobblestones, uh, then to Orion, and then he's like going through all of this. And he goes, "And then I knew when you walk past this street, they were putting down stones, and then your face became brighter. I saw your lips move, so I knew you were thinking about the word Deuteronomy." And that's why, because it's the name for cutting stones. And I'm like, okay. And then he's like, "And then not that long ago, we were talking about Epicurus and his ideas." And then he looked up, he looked at the sky, and I was like, "What?" So he's like really trying to lay out. He's like, "I totally didn't read your thoughts. I just like am observant." But I again had no context for this character, so I was like, "Is he actually just trying to cover up the fact that he's totally reading his thoughts the whole time?"
Right.
Mm-hmm.
No, there is not actually a preternatural angle to Dupin. Sorry to say, it is all.
Mm-hmm.
This would be this in terms of the explained versus the unexplained Gothic. This is the explained Gothic, where
Mm-hmm.
all of the there is no preternatural, even though it seems preternatural to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It is all very logic and deduction based, which is something that actually Poe was a really big fan of. He was not
Mm-hmm.
a fan of fake mediums or of mesmerists trying to pull one over on a crowd, that kind of thing. He was pretty shrewd about things. So he really, I truly believe he considered somebody like Dupin to be a real hero.
Mm-hmm. See, I prefer like people like that where they're like, "I have standards. These are my standards." Because like, I hate trying to pull one over on people. Like all those
Mm-hmm.
like the very obvious like psychic buildings, and you're like, "Yeah,
Oh
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
You're in a
mean,
beach town.
I
Okay."
and there may be different levels of people who do have some kind of gift or whatever, but I just,
Mhm.
I go into that with skepticism. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's I love a good paranormal story. I mean, that's what I write. I write
Mhm.
paranormal stuff, and I have a belief in the paranormal, but I also,
Mhm.
not to the detriment of science, and not to the, science and the unexplained to me live in a certain flexible relationship. Whereas
Mhm.
I'm going to assume that it's some sort of scientific atmospheric thing that's happening until I can't explain it any other way. And then when all these other rational things fail, then it is something that falls into the realm of the unexplained. But I
Mhm.
don't go to the unexplained first.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like as soon as I get something that's a little out of my normal day to day, I'm like, it's a ghost.
Yeah,
But that's just like that's a little treat for me.
there you
That's a
go.
little
Exactly.
me thing.
I feel the same way about ghosts. So yeah.
All right, well, that is all we are going to have time to cover today. So, thank you so much for joining me. I do want to take a second because you have a wonderful book out. It's The Haunted History of Invisible Women. It's beautiful, and it will be talking a lot about our next story that we're going to talk about with our main man, Poe. Do you want to tell all the listeners about it a little bit?
So yeah, Haunted History of Invisible Women: True Stories of America's Ghosts is real history, real ghosts, real women. What we do is we break the book down into different stereotypes or tropes that women have been sort of placed into or fallen into, and we examine that through the lens of ghost stories and the actual lives that these women lived, and very often, in some cases, ghost stories that were told about them before they even passed away. So we have a range of famous and not famous women, and we just kind of explore what telling ghost stories about them has meant, and how we can kind of unpack that. So it's really the intersection of women's history and ghost stories, and written by Andrea Janes and myself. And we are ghost tour guides in New York. And I have worked in many different haunted properties throughout this great nation. And there's, sort of a through line of an interest in the paranormal that has followed me and through all of my work. So in my fiction, I write about ghosts, but in nonfiction, it's been really about trying to get to the truth of it. So
Mhm.
separating fiction from nonfiction, and trying to do right by these women that very often were not done right by in life. And
Mhm.
so, so yeah, it's been a successful book. Our publisher Kensington has been very pleased, and we hope you'll check it out and tell friends, because word of mouth is really important on books like these. This is the first book of its kind to really look at women's history and ghost stories in this type of combination before. Rather, there have been collections of ghost stories written by women in a fictional capacity, but this sort of feminist compilation of women's stories in the ghost lore angle is we kind of were able to break a little bit of new ground on this, and it's got an afterword by incredible horror writer Linda D. Addison, and she's amazing. So we're really glad she was a part of our team too. So yeah, thanks. And anything about the book, if you look up A Haunted History of Invisible Women, if you just Google that phrase, then all of the bookstores will come up. So it's available in
Mhm.
audiobook, ebook, paperback, anywhere books are sold.
Plus, the cover's beautiful.
It is
So,
beautiful.
yeah,
It's taken
I'm
from a 19th
obsessed.
century photograph that was manipulated. It was one of the first
Oh,
photo manipulations. So it was the
that's
ghost
really cool.
of Subaru, Jeanette Subaru, as I believe is
Mm.
was the actual title of this particular um, woman that is disappearing into the wall. So this was early, like, spectral photography, but this was just obviously a trick of different exposures, but people didn't necessarily know that. So people would pass these things off as actual spectral photography,
Oh,
but
I
people
love
just
that.
didn't know how photographs worked. That's a whole nother story for another time, but there was whole trials about spectral photography and its
Wow,
reality, or its in this case, pulling the wool over people's eyes. But the actual photographer is not known, so it's an anonymous photograph.
that's really cool. I love that that's also just a tidbit that's thrown in. Like, that's another layer to this, you
It
know?
really is. It's an incredible. It's one of those things where you're like, why manipulate something when this actual 19th century thing exists? Like,
Hmm.
just don't know. Like, there's nothing better than that. Our
Yeah.
editor found that image, and we were like, well, there's our cover. Just thank you,
Yep.
art department, for putting pretty text around it.
make sure to tune in next week, and we will catch you all in the next chapter. Bye!
Thanks.